Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Trust you had a good weekend. We had a long one because of the Eid celebration, and it's been very chilly here in Arabia late. And the meteorological department are talking of lows of 3 degrees. Given the high altitude, it certainly feels 3 degrees already. I had a fireside chat with Mr. Ankush Shah, who's the managing director of the Samaria Group at the East African Venture Capital Association program last week, and it was a very interesting conversation we had. He seems to have been dealing with private equity firms for quite some time. Gave us a very deep insight into the Tanzanian situation as well, about which he was considerably more optimistic than many of the comments I've been reading. Home thoughts, I couldn't resist this. 2 neutron stars colliding. That's from MIT. Roberto Bolano, 2666. Every 100 feet, the world changes. A beautiful short story, The New Yorker, Last Evenings on Earth, by Roberto Bolano as well. Only in chaos are we conceivable, he said. And then the moon is fat and the night air is so pure it seems edible. We interpret life at moments of the deepest desperation. I think that's an important point as well. Very interesting piece in the New Yorker about narwhals. But as everywhere, the chance to listen without hearing ourselves in the background is melting away. Tracking when and where narwhals make such sounds will help researchers understand how the animal's behavior is altered by climate change and the growing presence of humans in the Arctic. For the moment, the opportunities for recording the sounds of narwhals are rich. Ship traffic hasn't yet flooded the Arctic with underwater noise, and undersea drilling and blasting is still rare there. Both can mask the sounds of narwhals and other cetaceans and scare off the animals altogether. But as everywhere, the chance to listen without hearing ourselves in the background is melting away. The narwhal is known as the unicorn of the sea, a pale porpoise-like resident of Arctic waters, and a close relative to the beluga whale. It takes its name from the Old Norse word narvala, or corpse whale, for its resemblance to the bodies of dead sailors. It is best known for the long horn and factor tooth, one of just 2 in the animal's head that extends through its upper lip. Last year, scientists discovered that narwhals use the tusk, a sensory tool loaded with nerve endings, to whack and stun fish before eating them. A new paper this week in the open access journal PLOS, one offers a far richer narrative. The scientists, led by Susanna Blackwell, an acoustics research firm, managed to tag 6 narwhals, 5 females and 1 male, with mics that remained on the animals for nearly a week. From each narwhal they gathered several continuous days of audio, more than 500 hours altogether. The animals were also fitted with GPS trackers, so their vocalizations, which were virtually non-stop, could be precisely collated with their location and depth. The net result was an intimate sonic document of the life of the narwhal. Interesting. Political reflections. Hervé tweeted, when the moderator asked them where they'd learned this information, the answer was almost always the same: Facebook. It was the perfect petri dish for a fungus-like Trumpism to grow. And then I went to the main article, which is in Vanity Fair. In 2008, he said, referring to our communication strategy, we were so far ahead of the curve Governing is harder than campaigning, but for most of our time here, we have at least kept pace with the change. Lately, it feels like we have fallen behind. The democratic communications advantage of the Obama campaign built in 2008 and built upon in 2012 was gone. The ground had shifted under our feet, the media environment had changed, and it had changed in ways that benefited the outrage-fueled messaging of the right wing. If I had better understood how dramatic this change was, I wouldn't have been so sure that Trump was going to lose in 2016. The news cycle was dead. Long live the content monster. As with most things, the internet is to blame for this. First, the news cycle is dead in the eyes of consumers. They want news immediately, on demand. When the moderator asked them where they'd learned this information, the answer was almost always the same: Facebook. It was the perfect petri dish for a fungus like Trumpism to grow. Trump understood that there were no rules and referees, and that a good story was much more valuable than an accurate one. Trump's main media experiences are the absurdity of reality television and the no-holds-barred world of New York tabloid journalism. Sadly, these were the perfect experiences to compete for president in 2016. In hindsight, it seems obvious that Trump would thrive in this environment. The hints were there all along. After that meeting in 2014, Obama sent me to Silicon Valley in New York to pick the brains of the smartest people in tech and media to better understand the current state of affairs and where things might be going. I went to Google, to Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and everywhere in between. The gravity of the challenge before us came in a meeting in Silicon Valley, when I explained the difficulty in getting our message out in the fragmented media environment, and one of the executives from a Silicon Valley giant responded, "We have been wondering the same thing and hoped you had some good ideas." And I think, we really underestimate the level of intrusion into this space. Very interesting article in the New York Times about Mahathir Mohamad leading Malaysia again at 92, and he is on a mission. Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad and his aides first entered the Malaysian government offices last month to find an alarming sight: oversized garbage bags filled with shredded documents, a snowstorm of loose papers on the floor, even half-consumed food left by former occupants in a hurry to get out. At the finance ministry down the street, Lee Guan Eng, Malaysia's new finance minister, found computers in which even the highest-ranking bureaucrats were locked out of certain accounts. In some cases, vital files were accessible only to a single person, Najib Razak, the nation's scandal-tainted former prime minister, who had also served as finance minister. Evidence of financial malfeasance by Mr. Najib and his cronies helped Mr. Mahathir's opposition alliance win national elections on May the 9th. Even without piecing together a single shredded document, Mahathir, who previously served as prime minister from 1981 to 2003, has discovered that the country is in a far worse financial shape than he and his allies had feared. The national debt, tallied at $170 billion by Mr. Najib's administration, has been reassessed, along with other government liabilities, at $250 billion. This is 80% of Malaysia's GDP. All have been raped by the previous governments of Mr. Mahathir. They have taken money and now they have lost the money. Mr. Lim said they were just robbing the country blind. I'm having nightmares practically every day, wondering what landmines will I tread on the following day. He said that the nation would have become a basket case. We would be at a terminal stage. And then talking about Mahathir saying it's version 2, I think it's very different from the version 1. We saw when he first became Prime Minister, he's more reformist. The man with a mission driven by the need to get things done in the shortest possible time. He's moving at a frenetic pace. We have asked so many people to resign, we are left with a skeleton. It's not a question of seeking revenge, Mr. Mahathir said, it's just the application of the rule of law. And he was asked about Trump, he said, I have no plans to go and see him. He calls him volatile. I don't know how I can deal with a person who is so much like a chameleon. There's some fantastic footage from the North Koreans. Have a watch. It's a video footage of the visit of Kim. And it's just marvelous to watch, and it shows you how the North Koreans see things. I came across a very interesting article in Global Research. Whoever attains maritime supremacy in the Indian Ocean would be a prominent player on the international scene. This is US Navy geostrategist Rear Admiral Alfred Thayus Mahan, 1840 to 1914. The Yemeni archipelago of Socotra in the Indian Ocean is located some 80 kilometers off the Horn of Africa and 380 kilometers south of the Yemeni coastline. The islands of Socotra are a wildlife reserve recognized by UNESCO as a World Natural Heritage Site. Socotra is at the crossroads of the strategic naval waterways of the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Among Washington's strategic objectives is the militarization of major seaways. This strategic waterway links the Mediterranean to South Asia and the Far East through the Suez Canal, the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Major transit route for oil tankers, a large share of China's industrial exports to Western Europe transits through the strategic waterway. The Indian Ocean is a major sea lane connecting the Middle East, East Asia and Africa with Europe and the Americas. It has 4 crucial access waterways facilitating international maritime trade. That is the Suez Canal in Egypt, the Bab el-Mandeb bordering Djibouti and Yemen, the Straits of Hormuz bordering Iran and Oman, and the Straits of Malacca bordering Indonesia and Malaysia. These choke points are critical to world oil trade as huge amounts of oil pass through them. From a military standpoint, the Socotra archipelago is at a strategic maritime crossroads. Moreover, the archipelago extends over a relatively large maritime area at the eastern exit of the Gulf of Aden. The objective of the US is to police the entire Gulf of Aden seaway from the Yemeni to Somalian coastline. Then talking about the establishment of an Air Force base on the island of Socotra was described by the US media as part of the global war on terrorism. So you see, Socotra has been in the firing line for quite a while. The establishment of a US military base in Socotra is part of the broader process of militarization of the Indian Ocean. The latter consists in integrating and linking Socotra into an existing structure, as well as reinforcing the key role played by the Diego Garcia military base in the Chagos archipelago. The U.S.'s Navy geostrategist Rear Admiral Alfred T. Mahan said, "Whoever attains maritime supremacy in the Indian Ocean will be a prominent player on the international scene." And this kind of thinking was what informed my piece in 2013 about how I have no doubt that the Indian Ocean is set to regain its glory days. When Crown Prince MBS began the Saudi war against the Houthis in March 2015, it was overconfidently named Operation Decisive Storm. It turned out to be anything but decisive, and is still going on 3 years later. And as I said previously in a tweet, it's a colonial war and cannot be won. This is a historical fact, with just one exception. November last year, I wrote how he had arrived on the scene and immediately launched an unwinnable war in Yemen. Head of China's top political advisory body, Wang Yang, paid an official visit to Uganda from Wednesday to Saturday and met with President Museveni. The Brexit dividend is a neo-Trumpian concept. It is the aggressive deployment of a non-existent thing, Mr. Aranovich. Let's move on to the currency markets. Obviously, we had a huge drop in the value of the euro last week. We're currently at 115.76, not too far off my target of 114.50. Dollar index 94.79. The Japanese yen 110.53. The Swiss franc 0.9968. The pound 132.45. The Australian dollar is at 0.7441. India rupee 68.035. South Korean won is above 1100 at 1104.55. The Rial 373.11, Egyptian pound 17.8815, and the Rand is softer again at 13.4403. Put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. You remember my initial objective was 94.50. We hit it, we fell off, we've come back, we're above it now again. Euro dollar, my target remains 114.50. Interesting article in Asia Times. Something like 1,000 accounts and more than 35% of all the Bitcoin. Are these so-called whale investors in effect the central bank of the cryptocurrency? Commodity markets. This is the Bloomberg Precious Metals Index via T commodity came under pressure. In particular, gold slipped quite sharply on Thursday and Friday, last at 1279.80. US oil slumps as China threatens duty on US crude imports. At one point down nearly 2%, crude oil prices crashed as US-China trade tensions escalated last Friday. China on Friday said it would retaliate by slapping duties on American export products, including crude oil. Punitive measures on bilateral trade have unnerved investors as it hurts global economic growth. This is a chart of Brent crude via Holga. This is a chart showing you production for US, for Russia, and for Saudi Arabia. And finally, this is a coffee chart. Coffee's been in a bit of a funk of late, going by this chart. Emerging markets in the middle of May, I wrote, this is all the ingredients for baking a good old-fashioned crisis. And you can see from this chart, 2018 is a horrific year for most emerging markets. That's from Holga. The Argentine peso is down 30%, Turkish lira 19%, Brazilian real 11%. Argentina's century bond yield rose to a record 9% as the peso crashed. Sub-Saharan Africa, World Bank reports as Sub-Saharan African growth is to accelerate to 3.5% in 2019 from 3.1% in 2018. Nigeria is to pick up to 2.2% in 2019 from 2.1% in 2018. Nigeria and South Africa make up about half. The Economist is pouring some cold water on this theory that Kabila is seeking to make his exit. If Mr. Kabila runs, can he win? The president is fiercely unpopular. In most of Congo, it is near impossible to find anyone who will say a good word about him. Polling by the Congo Research Group at New York University shows that only 17% of the population would vote for the ruling party. But the election could be rigged or bought. The leading opposition candidate, Moise Katumbi, a wealthy former governor and one-time ally of Mr. Kabila, held a huge rally in Kinshasa on June the 9th. Mr. Katumbi, in exile since 2016, appeared by video link. Whether he teams up with Mr. Bemba is far from clear. By excluding candidates and dividing the opposition, Mr. Kabila could sneak through under the first-past-the-post system without having to steal too many votes. If he did so, most Western diplomats would accept his victory. They value stability above all. Most Congolese, however, would not be thrilled by the prospect of more of the same. South African oil shares down 3.1% year-to-date, dollar versus rand. We've softened again to 13.44. Nigerian oil shares up 1.79% so far this year. The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 15.65% so far this year. Bloomberg had an interesting article, the highlights from the budgets of 5 East African economies and charts. Mauritius is seeing a narrowing deficit. Uganda trimming borrowing, says they aim to reduce borrowing after 2019-2020. Tanzania collected 69% of its target revenue in the fiscal year to June 30. They're going to reduce corporate income tax for new companies to 20% from 30%. And that's a good move. Rwanda's economy is forecast to expand more than 7% this year. The UAE is to give Ethiopia $3 billion in aid investments and will deposit $1 billion in Ethiopia's central bank to ease a severe foreign currency shortage. On Friday afternoon, Abiy got behind the wheel of a white car and personally gave Sheikh Mohammed, the de facto leader of the UAE, sitting in the passenger seat, a tour of Addis Ababa. And he also gave him a horse as a gift. Africa Confidential is talking of a pushback peril for Abiy, a radical offer to implement the UN's ruling on the borders, meeting resistance at home and silence in Asmara. My piece over the weekend was called Cut Taxes and Cast the Tax Net Wider and Avoid Being Hamband Totem. Last week, the big headline event was the synchronized release by EAC finance ministers of their individual budgets for the full year 2018-2019 beginning July the 1st. According to the budget numbers presented, Kenya's budget is twice the size of Tanzania, and bigger than Tanzania, Uganda and Rwanda combined. Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda plan to borrow more than $12 billion to plug budget deficits. In the new financial year, Kenya has a deficit of $5.58 billion, Tanzania $4.6 billion, and Uganda $2.4 billion. Under this fiscal consolidation plan, we project the fiscal deficit to narrow to 5.7% of GDP in the full year 2018-2019 from the estimated 7.2% of GDP in the full year 2017-2018 and further to around 3% of GDP by full year 21-22. As such, this will help stabilize the net present value of debt to GDP ratio below 50%, which is well below the 74% threshold considered to signal an unsustainable debt position. That's the Cabinet Secretary. Genghis Capital said it expected Nairobi's interest payments in the 2018-2019 fiscal year to grow by 31.11% to 3.9 billion, while redemptions will increase 36.7% to 4.7 billion. The Ugandan Finance Minister Matia Kasaija said our ratio of public debt to GDP now stands at 38.1% in nominal terms, which is much lower than the threshold of 50%, beyond which public debt becomes unsustainable. There is self-evidently a difference of opinion between ourselves and the Ugandans about what is a sustainable debt position. Interestingly, Tanzania presented the most fiscally conservative budget and is reducing corporate income tax for new companies to 20% from 30% for their first 3 years of operation to encourage investment. At a macro level, what is clear is that the EAC countries have embarked on a debt-fueled investment binge, and the sustainability of the debt will be decided by the return on investment of the investments made. This point will come into sharper relief as the US continues to dial up US interest rates and reduce the extraordinary stimulus. Emerging markets have been pounded of late, currencies have been crashing from Turkey to Argentina, and President Kenyatta seems seized of the direction of travel, going by the generosity of his welcome of the IMF's Lagarde at the G7. Therefore, the go-go days where you just stuck up your hand and asked for $500 million and got $2 billion are behind us, and it's high time our policymakers got with the program. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of Ethiopia has read the writing on the wall, and hence his economic pivot, which caught his own party and the rest of the world off guard. In these moments, being ahead of the curve pays exponential dividends, and the mercurial Abiy is delivering on all fronts. I think he saw very clearly how Sri Lanka got Hambantota. Sri Lanka borrowed billions from China to build a port, the Hambantota port. It is a white elephant, a vanity project, and China, Sri Lanka's creditor, has taken it back on a 99-year lease. So the first overarching point is that creditors are not Santa Claus, and miscues will exact a very heavy price. Countries will be Hambantota. Now, if you look at all the budgets, the common thread running through all of them is the size of the recurrent expenditure, which dwarfs everything else. Therefore, taxpayers have to ask ourselves, are we getting value for money? The situation reminds me of a time before Uber. Today, my taxi fares are about 1/3 of what it cost me pre-Uber. The question is therefore, how do we Uberize government? How do we Kodak the existing structure and move to an Uber future? I have no doubt that we could take 2/3 of the cost out of the recurrent expenditure. Again, we need to get ahead of this curve. If we don't get ahead of this curve, our creditors will. Let me finish off with Kenya Inc. CS Road Titch announced plans to repeal a law that caps commercial interest rates. The rate cap law has seen private sector credit growth crash from around 20% to close to zero. The SME sector, which has had to bear the brunt of the private credit growth slump and is the engine room of our economy, needs credit like a shot in the arm. CS Rotich dialed up excise duty on mobile money transfers by 2% and introduced a Robin Hood tax for transfers above 500,000 shillings. He projected tax revenues to rise by 17.5% to 1.9 trillion Kenya shillings, equivalent to 20% of GDP. A year-on-year increase of 17.5% in the tax take is a bold call. Existing taxpayers have been squeezed until the pips are squeaking. This is now a zero-sum game. In order to get the show back on the road and to get back to faster GDP growth, because growth is a silver bullet, we should be cutting taxes and casting the tax net wider. According to Samantha Singh of Barclays Africa, recurrent expenditure makes up 15.8% of GDP and 60% of the budget. The theme for this year's budget was creating jobs, transforming lives, and sharing prosperity. As I said, Kenya intends to repeal a law that caps commercial interest rates and has abandoned plans to raise some taxes. Nairobi all shares up 4.08% year to date, but still 9.35% below a record high set on April 5. NSE 20s down 9.76% year to date. Private sector credit growth continues to remain low, coming in at 2.4%. 5-year average is 14%. T-bills were oversubscribed during the week, with the subscription rate coming in at 259.5%. Yields on the 10 and 30-year Eurobonds remained unchanged at 7.4% and 8.4% respectively. We expect implementation of 16% VAT on petroleum products from September. East African Cables has reported full-year results this morning. Full-year revenue slumped 35.759%. Gross profit was down 17.428%. Profit before tax, profit and loss before income tax was worse by 14.388%. EPS negative 2 shillings and 24 cents versus negative 1 shilling and 80 cents last time. No dividend. And the auditors are saying there's a material uncertainty related to it being a going concern. The company says that they faced headwinds in 2017 due to unfavorable political environment and prevailing challenges of access to credit. They're confirming a decline in revenue of 36%, reduction of net earnings by 14%. They're saying there's a 22% decrease in expenses, and that to meet its financing requirements, the group is seeking improved credit facilities. I concluded by saying poor results again. You will recall I visited Kakuma, not last weekend, the previous one, and I wrote about it. But then I saw that in Kenya's Kakuma refugee camp, a small and marginalized community makes history by staging what is set to be the world's first LGBT Pride Festival in a refugee camp. And really, I was thoroughly impressed What I saw in particular, what I noticed, there are no men. This is a female sub-adult economy, and they really are determined, I must say.
It is we who have come out to create awareness, to tell people that we are of no harm and we are human beings.
Gay pride in Kakuma!
I'm very happy. I feel like I'm with my family. I'm with you guys. I'm very happy for real. Yeah.
Say no to homophobia. We are all together.